All right, hello everyone. My name is Thomas, and welcome to my channel. I do educational material on this channel, and we are uh, doing one video after another on the reciprocal system of theory. This is a theory of everything proposed by Dewey B. Larson back in the 20th century, up until the time he died in 1990. We are actually looking at his final book called Beyond Space and Time. And that actually came out posthumously in 1995. Most of his earlier work is on the hard sciences, chemistry and physics and astronomy. This book, though, is on the softer stuff, religion, philosophy, psychology. And we're looking into this because it's a little bit more accessible. We will be going back and looking at his earlier stuff here after this, but we're right now getting toward the end of Beyond Space and Time. And the basic idea on the reciprocal system is that it is a theory of everything. So you just have to, if you learn how it's a system of theory, if you learn how it works, then you can command the reciprocal system and you can plug it into any subject that you want. So it puts the power into your hands to do science for yourself, um, mainly by induction and deduction. And if you can figure out how the reciprocal system works and then you plug it into your subject, it will, confer benefits on you. It will yield answers, uh, and many of those answers might be answers that are long-standing mysteries in your field. And that's what Larson did here with the metaphysics. Uh, and he's attempting right now in this chapter to really kind of reconcile science and religion. This chapter is called Religion Reexamined. But before we get to that, let me just go over the reciprocal system real briefly. According to Larson, the universe is not made out of matter, and it's not made out of energy. The universe is made out of motion. A motion is the relationship between space and time. A relationship implies a fraction and a reciprocal relationship. So the space and time are in a reciprocal relationship with one another, basically meaning that any quality that adheres to one adheres to the other as well, such as three or more dimensions of space. So there are also three or more dimensions of time. There are there is a progression of time. Time is always getting later and later and later. For space, space is also flowing or progressing, meaning that space is always getting farther and farther apart. And that was observed by the Hubble telescope in the recession of the distant galaxies. Space and time are also in discrete units. There's no half a unit or 0.3 units. There's only 1 unit, 2 units, 3 units, 4 units, and so on. And those units are very, very small, so it's kind of hard to see that. But 1 unit of space in 1 unit of time is the speed of light. Space over time is speed. All scientific entities are fractions of time over space or space over time. And the speed of light is really kind of like the boundary between them. The speed of light, 1 over 1. And so where Einstein says that the speed of light is the maximum speed of the universe, Larson says the speed of light is the null point or the neutral point or even the origin of the universe. And that half the universe is actually moving faster than the speed of light. He calls this sector 2, or the cosmic sector. And sector 1 is the sector we're familiar with, the material sector, that's slower than the speed of light phenomena. This is mainly, chemistry and physics, atoms and particles, or really atoms and molecules. Um, Atoms and molecules of sector 1 build up to their most complex level, which is DNA, having a few billion uh, atoms per molecule. At that level, DNA becomes eligible to be controlled by a sector 2 entity. And that combination of the sector 1 and sector 2 is what Larson calls the life unit. Life is a combination of a material and cosmic entity. And life then evolves or develops and eventually goes from all the way from a single-celled organism all the way up to the most complex form, which is, Larson says, the intelligent human being. At that point, the intelligent human being then becomes eligible to be controlled overall by a sector 3 entity. Sector 3 is this region that is independent of space and time, or beyond space and time. I would argue that is what other people call God, or the religious, the spiritual, and that it has something to do with this speed of light, with this origin, with this null point or neutral area. And but when a human being, an intelligent human being, becomes controlled by sector 3, it finds itself kind of between two controls. One is the life unit of sector 2, which is controlling, directed by survival, whereas the sector 3 unit is controlling, directed by ethical behavior or good behavior. Sector 3 is always good. Sector 3 is always right. Sector 3 communicates with us through various means, such as revelation and intuition, but it also requires us to be able to translate those messages. And that's where we fall into mistakes, because we're not quite prepared to take those messages and understand them properly. That comes over time and with practice. Okay, now we are here in the middle of chapter 23, Religion Reexamined, and he's, talking about science and religion. And so he just, the last paragraph, he was saying that the heresies for which men are imprisoned or executed in one era often become perfectly respectable beliefs a few centuries later. The scientists cannot be expected to accept the transient and questionable items that make up such a large part of religious doctrine. In his own field, his aim is to accumulate a store of knowledge that is valid for all time. And he sets up some exacting requirements that must be met before any proposed addition to this accumulated knowledge is admitted. Religious doctrines are fully acceptable to him only if they are capable of meeting the same requirements or other equally rigid criteria of validity. Those items that cannot stand up under critical scrutiny or conflict with established knowledge in any field must be rejected. But neither science nor religion can arrive at a definite and unequivocal decision on every issue, as matters now stand. In both the religious and the scientific fields, therefore, many doctrines or theories are accepted on a tentative basis, pending further clarification. Much of the religious dogma that the scientist is somewhat reluctant to accept falls into this category, since all that can be reasonably expected of him is that he accept these unproven ideas on a provisional basis, just as he might accept a somewhat questionable scientific theory as a working hypothesis, in spite of a belief that it will ultimately be replaced by something better, they should not constitute a serious obstacle to his participation in a religious association of some kind. Of course, if the requirements of a particular religious group in this respect are unreasonable, the situation is different. For example, the scientist cannot accept the word of authority in lieu of the standard proofs of validity, and hence he cannot, in his capacity as a scientist, adhere to any organized religion in which submission to the authority of the ecclesiastical leadership is mandatory. He can do so if he continues to follow the currently popular practice of leaving his scientific beliefs and practices behind him when he closes the door of his office or laboratory. But we are now considering the situation of the scientist or any other person who wants to eliminate this dichotomy and to govern all facets of his life by the same basic rules. A scientist must reject any claim to the exclusive possession of the truth by any religion or creed, although he may legitimately conclude, after examining the various beliefs, that some one of them has a better perception of the truth than any other. Every major religion of the present day contains many elements that meet all of the requirements of validity. In fact, there is a basic framework of religious belief which is common to all. Furthermore, the evidence indicating that the earth is only one of a great many abodes of intelligent life in the physical universe is sufficient in itself to brand all claims of exclusive knowledge or special privilege as presumptuous. But there is no general agreement on details. Even after the scientifically unacceptable items are eliminated, and we are down to the hard core of the doctrines of the various religions, there will still be major differences with respect to questions with which science is as yet unprepared to deal. All of the religions claim to be right about these matters, and any one of them could be, so far as we are able to determine at present. Thus, there is no obstacle that would prevent a scientist from becoming an adherent of any one of the modern religions or their constituent organizations, providing that the governing regulations thereof are sufficiently flexible or liberal to permit him to disregard scientifically unacceptable items of dogma. In an earlier era, it would have been difficult to find a Western religious organization with the necessary degree of flexibility. Some of the Eastern religions, particularly the major Hindu sects, have always taken the attitude that every religious view has some relevance to the truth and that none is perfect. All are therefore entitled to respect and sympathetic consideration, even though, by accepting certain features of his own religion as authoritative, one automatically rejects the specific doctrines that are in direct conflict. Thus, there is no problem here for the Hindu scientists. But for most of the readers of this work, the point at issue will be the justification for affiliation with a religion such as Christianity, which until recently has taken a rigid stand on the question of the validity of its doctrines. There has been little or no relaxation of the official attitudes of many of the Western religious organizations thus far, and the governing bodies still take just as hard a line on the question of deviation from their theological positions as they did in past centuries, even though these positions have changed significantly in the meantime. But the membership at large no longer responds automatically to the directives of the leadership, and even the most authoritarian religious institutions have to recognize that there is now a considerable degree of de facto flexibility in the tenets of their respective creeds, regardless of the official pronouncements to the contrary. Indeed, the differences in viewpoint within a particular denomination of one of the major religions are now usually greater than those between denominations. and now he's looking at a theologian here who says a striking development of our century is that the theoretical differences no longer follow denominational lines. In a particular denomination, we may be somewhat more likely to find a particular type of theology, but in every case, there are exceptions. While this back to Larson, while this relaxation of the earlier theological rigidity has been going on, the individual members of the religious organizations have been growing increasingly impatient with what they regard as theological hair splitting and are more and more inclined to dismiss theological issues as inconsequential. This is particularly true among mainline Protestant denominations. One theologian says, individuals and families shift their allegiance from one Protestant denomination to another as casually as they switch brands of toothpaste. Today, if a pastor refers to our denominational heritage, he can be reasonably sure that 1/4 of the congregation won't know what he's talking about, and another fourth won't care. Okay, back to Larson, where the theological and organizational differences are greater, as between Catholic and Protestant or between Christian and Jewish religions, the interchange is not as casual. But even so, there is an increasing amount of switching from one affiliation to another for other than doctrinal reasons, mainly interfaith marriages, which are becoming more common as the isolation of various religious groups continues to break down under the influence of modern living conditions. Because of their vested interest in the prosperity of their individual organizations, the ecclesiastical authorities generally view with alarm the loss of members by reason of marriage to individuals of other faiths, and are inclined to predict emotional disturbances and other damaging consequences. The available evidence seems to indicate, however, that these gloomy views are unjustified. And he quotes one priest, by far the largest number of those who have disidentified from the Roman Catholic Church have done so in association with religiously mixed marriages. They are happily married, devoutly practicing members of Protestant denominations. They may have gone through a crisis of institutional affiliation, but they do not seem to have suffered any acute crisis of religious convictions. All of the following tends to show that while basic religious convictions, beliefs about the assertions of religion in general, are the products of an intuitive understanding that is deeply embedded in human nature and extremely resistant to change, each individual's commitment to the doctrines of a particular religious organization is essentially accidental and not a crucial factor in his life. The religious fervor that manifests itself in holy wars and bitter antagonism between neighboring groups of different faiths is mainly a matter of group solidarity rather than of intellectual or emotional attachment to specific religious doctrines. One historian points out that most of the factors responsible for the present distribution of the higher religions are non-religious, quoting, they derive from physical geography or from technology or from politics or war or economics, not from religion. Back to Larson, recognition by the individual that his present religious affiliation is due to the accident of being born in a particular place and under particular social and economic conditions should make it easier for him to change that affiliation if this is necessary to harmonize his religious commitments with his intellectual convictions. To the devout adherent of any particular faith, this suggestion that one's religious affiliation should be changed if necessary in order to achieve harmony between intellect and intuition will no doubt appear as an utterly reprehensible attempt to subordinate religion to science, an effort to force religion into a scientific mold. But In fact, the point that is being made is that a person's religious commitments, that is what he is required to assent to as a condition of affiliation with a specific religious organization, should be consistent with his religious beliefs, regardless of how those beliefs have originated. A scientist can accept what he now knows to be true, and anything further that he believes is true, and he can tentatively accept that which may be true. But being dedicated to the truth, he must reject that which is demonstrably false, even if this requires changing his religious affiliation. On this basis, it should not be difficult for a scientist to find a religious organization with which he can feel at home, and certainly these religious groups would benefit by the acquisition of new members who are fully convinced of the validity of the most important doctrines of the organization on the strength of their own reasoning powers, without having to rely on a rather uncertain faith. This is especially true in the present when so many of the church members um, who have been the most active in church affairs have lost confidence, not only in items belonging in the category of additions and interpretations, but also in certain of the basic doctrines of their church. An ironic sidelight is that some of the doctrinal assertions that have been under fire and are now being rejected by a substantial percentage of the religious leaders have been confirmed by scientific investigation, investigation reported in these pages. Okay, that'll do it for today. We'll be taking over the discussion tomorrow. Have a great day.